Hey chat. A couple days ago, political commentator and author of Give Them an Argument, Ben Burgis, wrote an article about the Colorado Supreme Court's recent decision to remove Trump from the GOP primary ballot. Now, before we dive into the content, we run into an immediate problem in the title of the article itself, which reads, "Instead of taking Trump off the ballot, Democrats should run a better candidate." The problem is that Democrats didn't take Trump off of the ballot. According to Wikipedia, on September 6, 2023, 4 Republican voters and 2 unaffiliated voters in Colorado, joined by the watchdog organization Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, CREW, filed a lawsuit in Colorado State District Court invoking the 14th Amendment disqualification theory. The lawsuit asks for the court to prevent Trump from appearing on the state's Republican presidential primary, naming Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold. So that's 4 Republican voters, 2 unaffiliated voters, and a nonprofit watchdog organization, not Democrats. Immediately before we even get to the content, the framing here is already dishonest. We're drawing a narrative thread between 2 unconnected things. This is not a good start. Let's continue. The Colorado Supreme Court has ruled to remove Donald Trump from the state's 2024 election ballot. The attempt will likely fail and backfire, but it's indicative of American liberalism's current distaste for the unpredictable messiness of democracy. In December 2018, the female cast members of Saturday Night Live sang Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas Is You" to a giant portrait of Robert Mueller. If you don't remember who that is, in December 2023, Mueller is the former head of the FBI. In 2017, he'd been appointed as a special counsel to investigate the possibility of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. In some ways, Russiagate feels like something that happened 50 or 100 years ago. But it's only been 5 years since liberals were pinning their hopes for a decisive political victory against Trump on the then forthcoming Mueller report. On Tuesday, the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump is ineligible to appear on the state's Republican primary ballot. The court's majority reasoned that Trump is guilty of insurrection for his actions, leading up to the January 6, 2021 riot, when his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. Thus, they said, he's ineligible to serve as president again. The 3rd section of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution disqualifies those who participate in insurrections against the government from holding office in the future. The legal merits of all this are in the eye of the beholder. The insurrection that inspired the 14th Amendment was the Civil War. Whether January 6 counts, or whether Trump's disgusting but ambiguous role in the event rises to the level where he could be held to have engaged in insurrection, is very much a matter of interpretation. It's hard to see what precedent would meaningfully guide such determinations. So here we run into our second problem. We can break this down into 3 parts. Was January 6 an insurrection? To what extent was Trump responsible for it? And what precedent exists to make this determination? Let's take these one at a time. 1. Was January 6 an insurrection attempt? On September 6, 2022, in a 1st District case against Cowboys for Trump founder Cuoy Griffin, a judge ruled that, quote, "The January 6, 2021 attack on the United States Capitol and the surrounding planning, mobilization, and incitement were an insurrection against the Constitution of the United States." Unquote. Citing Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the judge ordered that Griffin be, quote, "ineligible and barred from life, from serving in any elected capacity, or from holding any office, civil or military, under the United States or any state." Unquote. 2. To what extent can we say Trump engaged in the insurrection attempt? On December 22, 2022, the independent January 6 committee released a final 845-page report, concluding, among other things, the following, quote, "In the committee's hearings, we presented evidence of what ultimately became a multi-part plan to overturn the 2020 presidential election. That evidence has led to an overriding and straightforward conclusion. The central cause of January 6 was one man, former President Donald Trump, whom many others followed. None of the events of January 6 would have happened without him." Unquote. Furthermore, the report also reads, quote, "The committee recognizes that Section 2383 does not require evidence of an agreement between President Trump and the violent rioters to establish a violation of that provision. Instead, the president need only have indicted, assisted, or aided and comforted those engaged in violence or other lawless activity in an effort to prevent the peaceful transition of the presidency under our Constitution. A federal court has already concluded that President Trump's statements during this eclipse speech were plausibly words of incitement, not protected by the First Amendment. Moreover, President Trump was impeached for incitement of insurrection, and a majority of the Senate voted to convict, with many more suggesting that they might have voted to convict had the president still been in office at the time." Unquote. 3. What precedent is there to guide these determinations? Well, see above. I think the answers to 1 and 2 establish exactly that precedent. It seems like Ben either hasn't done his homework or he's more interested in selling a narrative than he is in the facts of the matter. Continuing with the article. In practice, though, just as the Mueller investigation failed to take Trump out of the equation in 2018, it's hard to image this and other attempts to take Trump off the state ballots, neutralizing him for 2024. The U.S. Supreme Court has a comfortable, conservative majority, and it seems quite likely that they'll rule in his favor. If so, the effect of the ruling in Colorado, and any other states that join the effort to disqualify the former president, will be to hand the Trump campaign a formidable talking point for 2024. Imagine him saying, "They were so scared of Trump winning they tried to stop you from trying to vote for him." The real question is, why does this kind of thing keep happening? Why do so many liberals hope Trump's original presidency would be ended not by his politics, but by the scandal known as Russiagate? Why do some now to be pinning their hopes for blocking his return to office, not on beating him in the 2024 election, but getting courts to exclude him from that election? For that matter, why didn't Democrats codify Roe v. Wade with the federal legislation prosecuting abortion right during the years when the party controlled the House, the Senate, and the executive branch? Why didn't they even try to take it out of the Supreme Court's hands by securing legal abortion through normal mechanisms of democratic politics? All of these are examples of liberals hoping to achieve their political goals, or to hold on to gains already made without having to engage directly in democratic politics per se. And that pattern reveals something about the pathologies of the current iteration of American liberalism. As Thomas Frank discussed in his brilliant 2016 book Listen, Liberal, or Whatever Happened to the Party of the People, the kind of liberalism dominant in the contemporary Democratic Party is technocratic. Its base is a layer of middle-class professionals who tend to think that the smartest, most competent experts should be in charge. Socialist vision of justice is a society that guarantees everyone's material needs and gives everyone a voice in shaping the institutions that touch their lives. The kind of liberals who give us Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal and Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society were vastly less radical, but the vision they offered their supporters was still a vision of raising the floor for everyone. By contrast, contemporary liberals, Frank argues, have redefined social justice to simply mean eliminating arbitrary barriers to the best and brightest from each group, meritocratically rising to the top so they can join all the other smart people in crafting the best solutions to social problems. This dynamic was at its clearest in the 2016 election, when supporters of Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton often expressed amazement that she wasn't a shoo-in given that she was. They kept saying, the most qualified candidate ever to run for office. It's unclear whether this was true even on its own terms. George H.W. Bush, for example, had been both vice president and head of the CIA before he ran for president in 1988. But the more important point is that everything about how liberals of this kind see the world that they framed in the question of these terms. In their imagination, elections weren't clashes between different groups with different political ideologies or different material interests. They were straightforward technocratic job interviews. On a rhetorical level, at least, Joe Biden has sometimes shown flashes of the older kind of liberalism. His record in office is far more of a mixed bag, but the impulse of some of his supporters to try yet another end run around the electorate shows the endurance of the strain of liberalism Frank diagnosed. The desire to achieve victory by getting some neutral source of authority to make a decision in their favor, rather than winning over the voters, has obvious appeal for people who think of politics like a job interview or an academic final exam. Liberals have taken to saying that democracy is on the ballot. There's a grain of truth there. There's a powerful strain of authoritarianism on the right, manifesting in contexts ranging from January 6 to the laws in various red states that make it harder to vote. Ron DeSantis, Florida, for example, engaged in a truly grotesque and disturbing crackdown on ex-felons who registered to vote. But the complicated truth is that even if they aren't nearly as bad in important ways, liberal technocrats harbor their own kind of deep distaste for the unpredictable messiness of democracy. Some liberals may feel that the Trumpist version of authoritarianism justifies trying to take the man who is, unfortunately, currently the leading candidate for the presidency off the ballot. In effect, they think democracy needs to be saved from itself. But this is misguided for several reasons. First, as it's mentioned, it's extremely likely to backfire in the 2024 election. Second, even if the Supreme Court overturns the Colorado ruling, and any that may be coming down the pike in other states, and thus it sets no legal precedent, the attempt to simply exclude a popular opponent from the election entirely may well set an informal political precedent right-wing authoritarians will follow in the future. Finally, and most importantly, this is a huge distraction from a point that should be blindingly obvious. Is Joe Biden a deeply unpopular incumbent? Are his wars unpopular? Are voters dissatisfied with his economy? Would they prefer someone younger whose cognitive condition is in less doubt? Is there a significant danger that Donald Trump will beat him next fall if the two men have a rematch? Yes, 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 and yes. But the answer to all these problems is very simple. The Democrats can just run someone else, with a more appealing platform. Someone who more people will vote for than vote for Donald Trump. That is, at any rate, how democracies are supposed to work. So I have one big problem with this article, and that is the framing. Ben has drawn a thread between reactionary tendencies in the Democratic Party and a completely unconnected incident. I don't even necessarily disagree with his description of those tendencies. I think they're a real issue worth discussing. But they are being invoked here in service of a broader theme that extra electoral means of preventing Trump from taking office are undemocratic. And I reject this wholeheartedly. Is the DNC technocratic? Yes. It can sometimes lean in that direction. Is it technocracy to prevent a fascist from taking power and dismantling democracy? Is it anti-democratic to uphold the law? No. No, I think not. Ben says the answer is very simple, that the DNC needs to run someone else. I'm not so sure it's that simple, but I'm certainly open to arguments. But we can put that aside. I can take that as a given. My real problem is that Ben fetishizes the aesthetic of democracy over any real measure of it. He undersells the threat that Trump and the GOP pose to democracy in the US, and he places the virtue of civility and the ritual of bureaucracy over an honest application of the Constitution. This sounds a lot like appeasement, and maybe appeasement is the answer this time. I doubt it. But Ben isn't just making an argument for this one case. He's saying this is how democracies are supposed to work. If this is the grand vision of democracy that Ben is selling, it's a very dim view indeed. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you found this helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. If you have any criticism or thoughts, please leave a comment below. As always, links are in the description.